Welcome to another Tactical Tuesday episode. This one's pretty open-ended. Didn't really have a game plan going, but what we did is we went for concepts, people throwing out questions, what they might have interest in, something they need to be explained better, and it turned out to be a decent episode. What we covered was first fire, subsequent first fire, and final protective fire principles in terms of how to place the counter on which particular unit or support weapon. So if you have your counter on your squad and your LMG is not marked with first fire, what happens when you fire either one of them again? So we cover those principles there. We also cover the principles of laying down residual fire, laying down a residual firepower wall to stop your opponent from doing what he wants to do with just a couple units. So getting that concept in terms of how to effectively drop down a wall of fire. Another thing we touch upon is the use of conscripts and whether you want to place them up front in your defense or you want to place them a little bit behind the lines. That might seem a little awkward, but you'll see the advantage that that gives you as the defender if you know where the attacker is going to go. Obviously, if he can avoid you, that's a different situation. But if he needs to go through you, then that's what the concept that we're going to be talking about here. It's going to be a shorter episode here. The second part of the conversation that we had on Tactical Tuesday went and revisited the S3 simple equation usage of conscript units in this same sort of concept where you go frontal defense versus standing back in a stone building's defense. We analyzed that again simply because it was in the conversation, and we just revisited what it gives you to refresh our minds that it may seem awkward, but first shot for conscripts is very important. Hope you enjoy the episode, and we'll see you at the end. Thanks for watching. All right, so gentlemen, anybody have anything pressing they want to cover right now before I've got a couple little minor topics? I definitely want to get to organizing the quote job assignments for the tanks in Borisovka, and so I think we can get that going. Again, that could just be that just treat that as it's going to be a learning exercise game where we're all just going to be digging out tanks and firing and calculating and bullshit like that, and we don't have to worry about infantry target type or nothing like that, and so we could just focus on the tanks. And if you don't know anything about tanks, then let us know. We can cover some basics of the anatomy of the tank counter, and maybe some basic rules with it. And then most of the rules essentially just like looking up crap on charts, so that's what it seems to be. But there's some little idiosyncrasies, of course, with tanks, as it always. But yeah, that's kind of the plan. So if anyone wanted to share something first, we can go for that, which I'm down for. Or we could just start talking about tanks in the game or whatever. So with that, anybody have anything they wish to share, or some sort of oddball thing they covered up? There's
I got a question on rules, if that's all right.
Yeah, sure.
For a machine gun keeping rate of fire during the defensive first fire,
okay.
If they keep rate in SK, is it still movement factor dependent? Because it's not real clear in the rules. I know ASL, it's pretty clear that even if you keep rate of fire, you can only fire at a target that's spent more than one, movement factor.
Right.
If that's the one you fired at, is that, anybody have any thoughts on that or have it in the rules? Because the rule just says that you just keep rate of fire and it's like any other phase.
Right. Well, you can because the defensive fire phase is a little the defensive first fire, which is essentially the movement phase. So that's what we're looking at there. Defensive fire in the defensive fire phase. When you're done, you're going to be putting a final fire counter on the thing. So there's a slight difference on the technique of firing the rate of fire machine gun or any other weapon for that matter that has a rate of fire. So given what I like to think of it as this way is, given the rate of fire, if you maintain rate of fire, it's as if you didn't fire. You know, it doesn't mean you can move. Like if you prep fired and you fired your machine gun 12 times and you still maintain rate of fire, it doesn't mean you can move. You've still fired. So if you're done firing at the end of that phase, you would just mark with a fire, with a prep fire marker. Now with the defensive fire, it's slightly different. Let's say you're firing at units that are moving, and then yes, you may only fire on a target the number of times in that specific hex or location as this may be, which is the same thing in SK. It's different ASL, but the same, essentially the hex / location as the number of movement factors, movement points it's expended. So obviously if you moved one hex into an open ground and then the next, you know, and you fired on him, maintain rate, and then he moves out of your LOS, you can't really fire on him again because of the movement factors he expended was only 1. Now, obviously, if you moved in, you know, something more, it costs more, like 2 for trees, or brush, or building, or up a hill into a building is 4. You know, you could fire on him 4 times, potentially with rate of fire. Then you could do so normally. Now, if you maintain rate of fire after, let's say after that 4th shot, after the 4th movement factor, movement point expenditure has been conducted, then you can't fire on him again, but you're free to fire at other targets. And let's say you maintain rate of fire again, which, you know, you'll find your mortars are doing this a lot. Then he's done moving, and then defensive fire phase comes. Your gun still isn't marked with the first fire marker. Then you may conduct more fire at any particular target any number of times. So it's kind of you're limited. You're only limited to the number of shots that you could take on a unit in the movement phase based on movement factors, movement points expended. But let's say he moves into like that open ground hex right in, you know, in your LOS. So you get 1 shot on him, and then he's done moving, and then you can't fire on him again. The defensive fire phase comes, then you can fire on him as much as you want. You know, given the rate of fire is still going to be maintained. So seems kind of strange, but it's like, you know, you can't fire on him until Oblivion comes.
But if you put down residual fire, you can't keep your rate of fire.
Right.
Correct?
Any placement of residual fire, whether from an ordnance weapon or a machine gun, expends your rate of fire. Yeah.
Right.
That's a big distinction. You'll see that, and that's why last game when with Craig, when I saw those 4 residual fire markers coming out, it kind of looked to me like the Bofors was blasted him because it happened to be 8. I looked to me that the Bofors blasted him at 2 separate locations, but it was 2 different firing units fired on those two individual units. So yeah. Now, of course, if you let's say you do leave residual fire because you lost rate of fire, or you wanted to leave residual for whatever reason, you would leave residual there, and then if you fired on another unit in another location, you would leave residual there as well. So because you haven't maintained rate, you're still leaving residual fire. Now you're sustained fire at that point, so the penalty, I mean, that's pretty much the reason why you can leave the residual fire, is because you're not getting it, quote, for free. You're risking something for that residual, and that's usually the rule. There's usually like a if there's something to be gained from something over and above what is normal, then usually there's a risk associated with it in terms of gameplay. So not too many times have I seen the mechanics of gameplay where you kind of get something for free, sort of like that. The only real, quote, cheat in the game system in terms of getting something for free is when mortars are firing smoke. So when mortars fire smoke and they maintain rate of fire, they may continue firing smoke. So everybody else that fires smoke, you know, obviously they use the area target type as you do. They must expend their rate of fire to fire smoke. Or when firing area target type. It doesn't really matter whether they're firing smoke or not. If they're firing area target type, they have to expend all the rate of fire because they're blanketing the area. Where mortars, that's just the nature of the mortar, which makes them extremely dangerous at times. So you don't want to take the 82 millimeter mortars, not that there's a lot of them, very lightly. If they go off on a tear, that's a lot of firepower. That's a lot of firepower. So, but yeah, that's a good question. So
Because the rules are not real clear on that it's movement factor dependent. It just says whenever you expend a movement point, the defender can halt you and fire on you.
right. No, do you have that rule section for that one?
3.3.3,
333. It's the
page 13 of the number of the SK4.
oh, gotcha.
3.3.3. Because it just says the portion of occurring during the enemy movement phase is called defensive first fire and can only be versus a moving unit. Defensive first fire attacks affect only the moving units regardless of the other units. Anytime a unit or a stack expends movement factors. Because it came up in one of my games that they kept rate, I had only expended one movement factor and I had stopped. Or I had moved to where it was out of line of sight, and it was, can he still fire? And
Right.
I thought it wasn't, and we looked up the rules, and the rules weren't clear, so we agreed basically to allow infinite number of.
Wow.
But and I had said that I was going to ask some, you guys, but like I said, in ASL, it's pretty clear.
Yeah.
It is movement factor dependent. I think even an example shows that a leader in a MMC move, the leader gets pinned after expending one movement factor in the open. The MMC can move on. The machine gun, it says, can fire at the MMC that moved, but can't fire at the leader again because it didn't expend a movement factor.
Right.
So that's the only reason why I was confused. But SK is not ASL, so.
Right. Do you know where that reference is, Mark? I know.
Well, it's tough to tell as usual. They kind of spread it out between 333. It's in the 333 section, but they also decide, in the middle of that section they'll talk about final protective fire.
Yeah.
And then after they have the paragraph of final protective fire, they suddenly decide, let's go back and to say a unit that survives the defensive first fire attack can be fired upon again in the same location during its movement phase before expending additional movement factors, movement points, but only by different attackers or if it expended at least 2 MFMP in that attack. So the same unit or weapon can never defensive first fire, subsequent first fire, or final protective fire on a moving unit in the same location more times than the number of MFMP.
There it is.
Right, expended, right. So this is one of those that the kind of it's a classic sort of ASL SK trying to be a little more conversational in their style of rule presentation, but almost everybody defaults to what ASL says. And so I've always played it as you move into, you expend one movement factor, you get one shot. Okay. And if you spend 2 movement factors, you can get up to 2 shots from the same stack, machine gun, whatever. Okay.
Yeah.
Now the difference is, as I said, is if, in my impression, is that if a unit suddenly pins, they are considered no longer moving. And so how that kind of interferes with, let's say your example with the leader and the squad, moving into the open ground, machine gun, fires into it, pins the leader, the squad is okay. Now, of course, in that case, it's only one. So let's assume they move into woods. So it's 2 movement factors. Leader gets pinned, squad is okay. So the first shot pins the leader. You say, all right, I'm going to take the machine gun had rate of fire. I'm going to fire again. Is the leader considered moving at that point? Because you can only affect moving units.
Yes. Yes. The difference with the pin,
Right.
what the pin does, and it's really odd. and this not even. It's just one of those confusing things where you think he's quote done moving, so he can't move any longer. So what happens is the units entered the terrain, expended 2 movement. In this case, expend 2 movement factors, right? Because if you only expend 1, you're just 1. So you expend 2 movement factors to enter a building or a woods or whatever the terrain might be. They get fired upon on the first movement factor expenditure, right? They get pinned. So normally you want to think of it this way. So they get pinned, but they've expended 2 movement factors in that location. Their status is that they're pinned, so you get a second shot. But keeping that in mind, when your unit is, let's say, moving in the open, right, and then you fire upon them or moving anywhere. So they're using non-assault movement, moving into some woods, you fire on them. First shot, they get pinned. Second shot, the non-assault movement modifier does not apply because they are no longer moving. So therefore the +1, the non-FFNAM, does not apply to the attack. The same thing if they're moving in the open. If you're moving, and you pin them, they lose both those modifiers. And so now they're, quote, like a 0. Because they're all on the ground, they're not moving, they're just stationary. So, let's say you have the situation where a unit moves in the open and gets fired upon. Let's say we have 3 targets that are going to fire upon them. The first target fires upon them, -1 movement in the open, -1 non-assault movement. So it's -2. So let's say it's a 4, -2. That unit pins the target. Second unit, which is in a different location because otherwise a mandatory fire group applies. These are 3 separate units in 3 separate locations. Second target fires upon him, pinned. Let's say it's another 4 firepower attack. 4 firepower +0 because the pin status eliminates the non-assault movement and move in the open. So it's a 4-0. Let's say it gets a morale check on the unit and it breaks. Okay? First unit pins him. Second unit pins him -2, and then the second unit breaks him +0. Third unit fires on the unit, third squad or whatever, fires on the same unit on that first movement factor, on the 1 movement factor expenditure, right? It gets a 4 -2 because the unit is no longer pinned, because broken units are not pinned.
Yeah.
So you can have the modifier, lose the modifier when you pin. If you break, then you're still considered moving in the movement phase, and then therefore you can get shot at with a -2, so it can bounce back at you. You'd have to, of course, have that number of shots. But let's say if you had a rate of fire, let's say you had your machine gun, your rate of fire example, and let's say he moved like up into a building or up into the woods on a hill, so it expended 4 movement factors. So your first shot would be, -1 non-assault movement into the woods. The second would be +1, and if he breaks, then it'll go back to the 0 because now he's considered non-assault moving. So, but of course you can only fire him 4 times. But yeah, that's kind of funny, John. I found that section there. Yeah, a unit that survives defensive first fire can be fired upon the same hex during its movement phase by expending additional movement factors, and that's under the final protective fire. So, what you were looking for, Shannon, I think it was Shannon, right? Yeah. What you were looking for, Shannon, is in the final protective fire column on the next page.
Yeah, I see it now.
About halfway down. Yeah, it's kind of, I completely agree with Mark. It's just, sometimes the starter kit will, like he said, in the conversational approach, will just bounce around, and that's where you get these. I mean, that's a very important section for not to be in the first fire is pretty silly. I mean, you can state this exact same paragraph, but put it in the first fire, because that's when your shot's going to happen. You're not going to look at final protective fire until like later. That's like the end of around the defensive fire phase, all that bullshit. Final protective fire doesn't really come into play too often, to be honest with you. It doesn't really, a lot of people don't want to risk it, and so to look for that you could shoot at a guy a number of times.
That's still movement factor dependent too, right? The final protective fire, you can only final protective fire on them as many times as they spent.
Yes, that is absolutely true. You're right. So in
Right.
final protective fire, if they expended 2 movement factors, you can final protective fire twice. You know, at target, as long as you don't break, or you can keep firing.
Right.
Yep.
But typically, the final protective fire, they either have to be in your hex, which doesn't occur until the Japanese came along and started Kit 4, or I guess you could have a CE vehicle in your location as well, and you could fire on them a number of times for final protective fire. But normally, because if once you're final fired, you can't fire at anything other than adjacent to you. So the opportunity to final protective fire versus first fire at units that are expending multiple movement factors, movement points, is far more limited in its game scope. So yeah, but yeah, I'm not a big fan of them putting that there. It's because it's not. That's where one of the cases where you want to take your highlighter and drag a highlight down the side to make note of that paragraph, or actually the run-on sentence. I think that's one sentence, the one sentence paragraph.
No, there are two. So there are two. Yeah, there's a period in the middle. Yeah. So.
Oh, okay. that must have been eroticized back in. So.
Yeah. Yeah. There you go. Yeah.
But yeah, but yeah, some of them get kind of long, and that's the difficulty. I mean, the ASL rulebook's tough enough as it is. I mean, it's just, and then you start mishmashing it together.
The person I'm playing doesn't have the full ASL rulebook, so I didn't want to be, that guy and pull out the rules because it's not the same set of rules.
Right. Yeah, I would hesitate. I would hesitate at all if you're playing starter kit. Just play by the rules that you have in front of you. If it's not there, and I'm a big supporter of this. It's a different game. It's a self-contained game. If the rules aren't there, then we need to make adjustments for it. We don't need to make concessions to say, oh, we'll just access the rule book. Well, when the rule book's $100 and a lot of people don't have it,
Well, that's why I was asking if somebody knew where in the SK rulebook, and
yeah,
I read over that. I don't know how many times, and it just didn't dawn on me that it says right.
Yeah, it's the middle of page. You're right. The middle of the first column of page 14 is where it actually physically says, the same unit or weapon can never defensive first fire, subsequent first fire, or final protective fire on a moving unit, the same location more times than the number of MF MP expended. So that's where that was, and that rule applies to rate of fire machine guns, rate of fire AA guns, whatever. That's just that gets kind of blanketed over everything.
Right.
Let me throw one scenario at you and see if I'm understanding this right. So if I had one guy come out of cover and he moves one hex towards a unit and then tries to throw smoke into into the defender's hex. Yep. That's 3 movement points, correct? 3 movement factors.
Those are
3 movement factors, but in two separate sort of phases. So the first move into let's say into the road, for example, that's 1 movement factor, and then you get to fire. You get to do what you want to do, whatever. Then you announce, all right, once you've survived all that incoming fire, then you say, okay, now I'm throwing smoke. Boom! I've now expended 2 movement factors to throw the smoke. You roll for the smoke placement, and then your opponent gets to decide whether they want to fire or not on you. And then again, each unit would get to fire on you technically up to 2 times because you expended 2 movement factors now in that hex. And also as I learned from Stu many months ago, it's not just that, but let's say the incoming fire. Do you mind if we just kind of pop something on Boriskova here for a moment?
Yeah, do whatever you need to. Yeah, that's why I pop it up so you guys can play around. Do whatever you need to. This is not a big deal.
Yeah, let me see. Let me see if I can get something up real fast. Let's say German squad. Yeah, we'll say. We need to find cover. Here we go. All right, here we go. Right there. Okay, so let's say German squad's there, and we'll put a Russian squad. Russian squad here. Okay, so boom, right there. Okay, so I just say so the German decides. All right, I'm gonna move here for 1.
Right.
Okay, so the Russian goes, okay, great, I'm gonna fire on you. Okay, so he fires on you at 8 minus 2, let's say, because you decided you didn't declare non-assault movement, which would be stupid.
Right.
In this case. But we'll assume that's what you did. So 8 minus 2, we'll assume you survive. You rolled an 11, gax the roll or something like that. Rolled a 12, gax the roll. Now there's now let's assume there's 4 residual there. Okay, so the residual gets placed. Now you continue. The German player says, okay, I'm going to try to throw smoke and into this guy's hex. All right, so that's a 2 movement factor expenditure. First thing that happens is the German rolls the die, and let's say he doesn't get lucky. Okay, so he doesn't. The first thing that then happens is the German player, since he has never taken the residual in the hex, has to take the residual, and that happens first. Okay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So he's never taken the residual fire, so now he's moved in the hex, and he's never been affected by the residual fire. So the first thing that happens is he has to take the residual fire, and so he takes a 4 minus 2 because he's moving in the open. After that, then the Russian player can go, okay, now I'm going to fire on you, and he can fire. He can then fire. So let's say he's first fired. So he's first fired. Now he can subsequent first fire on you. Oh, sorry. he can subsequent first fire on you at 4 minus 2 again because you're still moving in the open. And then he could turn around and say, okay, since you've expended 2 movement factors, I can take a second shot on you, and I can do final protective fire and fire 1 more time.
And that's when the die roll becomes a morale check on the Russian squad.
Correct. Right. The die roll. Right. The die roll is a normal morale check on the Russian squad. The only thing that modifies it is if there's a leader in the hex, you get the leader modification. But again, the leader also, it's a morale check on the leader as well. So the leader has to survive.
Cool.
If the leader's directing the fire, right?
Correct. Yeah, we'll assume the leader's directing the fire.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, because if the leader is not directing the fire, then he's not affected by it.
Right.
Yeah. So he's not firing, so he is not susceptible to any of the detriments of final protective fire.
Yep.
As well as, for example, let's assume there's another Russian squad here, and during this guy's final protective fire, this guy suddenly just wakes up and goes, "Oh, I'll join in." Okay. The die roll would be a morale check on this guy, but not on him because he hasn't final fired yet. He would just get marked with the first fire marker, and and he's done.
Yeah.
And the residual would would go up to 6 at that point.
Yeah.
So does that help to explain the mechanic in that regard?
Absolutely, yeah. I thought I had some of the basics down. The one thing that I didn't quite expect was that since the German unit was trying to throw smoke, he would have a subsequent attack by the residual fire since he's expending those movement factors. Makes sense. I didn't realize that.
Because he did that in a game, and I just said, "Wow, I never knew that." And you look through the rules, and sure enough, seems to be how it works. Yep. So,
No, let's grab a LMG and put this on this guy.
okay.
So
why don't you go ahead and put things back where you want them to be, Stu?
So let's just say he moved into the trees, right? So and residual fire is there. Well, both these units. Let's say the squad. Let's just start from the beginning. It should be easier that way. So we have the top squad. He fires on some other unit. Clone this unit here because we can do that. This guy moves over here. Let's see, fires over here and pins this unit for whatever reason. So that unit is now marked with the first fire counter. Okay. And this is where your first fire flow chart, if you guys need to read this, I want you guys to seek it out. I'm not sure if we have it listed here, or it might be listed on the ASL. I'm sure it's listed on the SK server, or just look up first fire flow chart.
It's on the Texas ASL site.
Yeah, Texas ASL's got a lot of good resources. And now let's say both of these units, the squad with the LMG has first fired. Now let's say the squad wants to fire at the unit moving into the woods in X0, right? And I won't even touch the squad just for the hell of it. So now he's going to subsequent first fire, which is going to put a final fire marker on him. And you would think that since the LMG hasn't fired, it's only marked with the first fire, but that's not the case. What happens is now you mark them both with final fire. So essentially you're going to lose out on that LMG in terms of utilizing different shots. Now what you can do, you can say, oh, that's kind of screwed, because he kind of gets screwed out of that. What you can do is you could fire the LMG at the first MF, right? The 2 firepower, you know, and so it could be a 2 plus 1, 2 plus 0, and then it could be marked with a first fire, right? And then later on, as subsequent shots, you could then fire them both together. Essentially, you could probably it's like trying to get a free shot out of your LMG. But if you fire this unit together as a fire group, when he final fires the LMG as well, even though it hasn't lost its rate of fire, because the 447 is the manning crew behind that. Get the chart, look over the chart, and it's real simple to go through. Just kind of walk through it. But that's kind of the difference. It talks about, like, if you first fire the LMG and not the squad, you know, what you do then is since the squad is the operating the LMG and not the opposite way, is you could let's say first fires the LMG over here and pins him, and then the squad can then fire somewhere else, and then he's marked with then at that point they're both marked with the first fire, because he's not combining the LMG, right? And then if he wants to fire again subsequent first fire, then they're both final fired, because the squad can utilize 2 support weapons at one time. So if he had 2 LMGs, you know, if he had 2 LMGs in his possession, then he could use one or both and then forego his firepower, or use one, etc. So it's a little different if the squad fires first. Oops, I don't want the infantry firepower thing, just give me the regular one. Oh, crap, just delete that. So that's one thing you want to be sure of, is when the host, quote, the host unit fires, and then he subsequent first fires and then adds the LMG on top of that, the LMG is going to be final fired. It gets over, like, a lot of times the guys will put, you know, I don't see it a lot, but usually people will just fire them all together, and you usually don't see that distinction. But there's a lot of times where, again, like if you're short with firepower, and let's say this unit's like running across here, like at a range of 5, right? Then you might want to take this long range shot with the LMG, and then save your squad to fire somewhere else. And so it makes a slight difference in the, quote, timing of your fire shot on that. So I'm 99% sure that that's possible, but make sure you just pop up if you want to pop up the site. I actually have it downloaded, but I don't know where the hell I put it.
I just dropped it on the Tactical Tuesday comments
Beautiful.
text channel. I don't know if that's the one you're talking about, but no, this is take a look at it.
Yes, that's it.
Okay.
That is it. Oh, let me open the file. Okay. Yeah. I'm going to have it on. It's not going to show up on your screen, but it will show up on the recorded screen. Yeah. So if you fire, so in this case, wow, that's a nice chart you put it. So
Yeah, I saw the original one, and this guy he prettified it a little bit. He's obviously got some serious PowerPoint foo, and decided to apply it to his hobby.
Right, right. So you've got the starting location. If you guys want to pop that open on the that John, I mean, thank you, John. That's a huge thing. If you want to open that file, it will download, and then just click open on your Windows. Your starting position is the upper left, where you have your squad and your MG. So if you only fire your where does that go for? Oh, if you only fire your inherent firepower, the top arrow, A. If you follow A, if you fire your inherent firepower, you go to the right. And so he's only first fired at that point if you only fire the inherent firepower. So he's first fired, the machine gun hasn't fired at all. Okay? Then go back to the starting location. If you fire them both, right? If you fire them both and the inherent firepower and the MG gets ready to fire, you still put a first fire marker on the 467. Let me reduce this a little bit, or on the unit. I think that shows up on the screen. That's not going to show very well. Then, oops. So your machine gun is still active. It can be fired again, and as long as it maintains the rate of fire. Now, let's say your machine gun fires once again at a different location. You know, because your squad is first fired, then your machine gun fires, but loses rate of fire. Don't worry about fire lane or anything like that. And then it loses rate of fire, then it then becomes marked with a first fire marker matching its host unit. But and then you've got the situation. The main situation, what I talked about initially, was when the machine gun fired first. Actually, any one of those different locations. If the machine gun is marked with a first fire marker, and then you fire the squad, either way, you fire the inherent firepower is optional. Whether you fire the machine gun and the inherent, they're both then marked with a final fire. So either way, if either one of the units, whether the MG is marked with a first fire, or the squad is marked with a fire. Let me go. God damn it. So let me show it on the Vassal thing. So you've got. I'm going to clone this. So you've got these two different situations here, just to show them both exactly at the same time. There we go. So you've got this situation. If you look on Vassal, you fired. Oops, this is the first fire. So the chart essentially is representing this. Oops. Mark it over here. So the bottom one shows the machine gun firing, which is the top. Well, let me just put them in the same position. That way I don't get you guys confused on top, bottom, top sort of bullshit. So the bottom squad at LMG has the LMG first fired. So he's first fired some other target, whatever the case may be. He has a marker on him. And the top one is the opposite, where the squad has the marker on it. Right? So at this point, either one can fire independently of one another. So if they don't fire group, okay? If they don't fire group together, meaning the top set of counters, if the LMG fires at some other target by itself, and let's say it loses rate, then they just both become first fired. Okay?
Got it. Okay.
And the same thing with the bottom case. If the 447 fires at some other target, not with the LMG, and he first fires at some other moving unit, then they both become first fired. That's what the little double arrows, where the intermediate one right in the bottom, in the middle, is when they're both marked with the first fire independently, and then the other unit fires at something else. Okay? Now, if you first fired, let's take for the final example, which is the kind of wraparound example. You've got the top, both of them fired at their respective target somewhere else, but then they want to combine for a subsequent first fire shot because either the squad is subsequent first firing or the LMG is subsequent first firing. So they're firing, combining fire. Let's say the 4.67 moves here, and they want to combine fire at the 4.67. At that point, regardless of rate of fire, there's no rate of fire at that point. Because one of them is subject to first fire penalties. When both of those combinations fire, then they are marked with a final fire marker. So if one of them is first fired, doesn't matter which. If one of them is first fired, and then they fire, and then they both fire at the same target, then they are marked with a final fire. So the first fire flips over to a final fire. It final fires everything that squad has. So are we following that? You guys got that? Do you understand that concept? It's not easy. It's not an easy concept, and you know, it's just this flowchart. It's hard to read in the rules, but the flowchart really shows it quite clearly, in my opinion.
Well, I've been looking at this specific flow chart and its predecessor for about a year, and
Okay.
I've been trying to make heads or tails out of it. But having this explanation of it right here, that's the first time it sort of broke the log jam, and I understand what they're trying to depict now. So that makes it far more clear. So thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Yeah,
And
because
I apologize to the group for the rabbit hole. So.
no, not at all, because this is important.
Thanks for watching us and joining us for this session of Tactical Tuesday. This was like an impromptu session. Didn't really have a game plan, so we went with questions. Any questions come up? This one was a really good one. I hadn't really covered it in the past, and with the group bringing in references, John bringing in the chart from Texas ASL Club in the first fire flow chart. Very good flow chart. Download it, read it, go over it. Very good chart, very simple chart to follow. So take a look at that. It will explain a lot of things. Even me, when I'm going down, like what happened here, what happened there. When you pop that chart open, that should be one of the charts that you should be looking at every once in a while before every game to refresh you on that concept. That concept is very important in ASL. What it allows you to do is it allows you to fire units independently, making sure you can use the most effective firepower from those particular units and support weapons to better give yourself an attack, defense, what have you. So our example kind of explained that. We have essentially 2 units, 2 LMGs, and they put down a wall of firepower. Wall of firepower. That's what you want to do in your games. So next week, we're going to start a Borisovka game. What we're going to do in that one is we're going to summarize the rules or summarize some of the concepts behind AFVs. Since it's strictly an AFV scenario, we don't have to worry about close combat with infantry or anything like that. So it's going to be strictly AFVs. If you would like to join and watch that or participate, there are 18 vehicles, I believe. I think there are about 8 of us so far that's interested in playing together as a learning concept. It's going to be a learning game. So bring your AFV knowledge with you, help out the group, and maybe we'll all learn something together. We'll see you next week on Tactical Tuesday.